You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, a podcast where I am on a journey to understand why people watch wrestling, right? Because it's strange. If you're not familiar with it and you were to just encounter someone that you think you know, and then they're watching wrestling and you were to be like, what is this? And then they start to explain it to you, and then you just get more worried about your friend the more that they explain wrestling. At least that was often my experience. But my name is Evan Burke, by the way. But I also have two very close friends that I've known for 20 years at this point, who I love and respect, and who have committed themselves to wrestling about as hard as a human being can commit themselves to wrestling. And occasionally, they even bring friends of theirs from deep academia to come and also contest wrestling. I don't know. Look, I didn't finish college. I don't know what the terms are. So...
But you were in college for so long.
I know. I'm in college again now.
You're back in college, Evan.
I know. It's terrible. Right. You sound like the voice in my head that causes me to review my failures before I go to bed.
It's okay, man. I went to college for several years, too.
The point is, hopefully this is a podcast for you if you either are not a fan of wrestling and you are like me and you want to understand how this all works, or you're somebody who does enjoy wrestling and you want to hear someone else's perspective on it. And since, in theory, those categories should cover all humans, then this is probably for you.
We need to, get a recorded intro. Anyway, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been,
way to just shit on my intros, bro. I put a lot of effort into coming up with these on the spot with no preparation.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in professional wrestling for about a dozen years now. I wrestle, I do commentary, I do ring announcing, I do a little bit of everything. And right now I'm doing this podcast. I'm very happy to be here, and I'll throw it over to Professor Abelson. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College. I am a lifelong fan of professional wrestling and more recently, somewhat of a scholar. I am extremely excited to introduce our guest for this episode. She is Associate Professor of Communication Arts and Sciences at Dominican University, President of the Pro Wrestling Studies Association, co-chair of the Wrestling Studies area for the Midwest Popular Cultural Association and American Culture Association, editor of the Popular Culture Studies Journal. Her many publications include Convergent Wrestling, Participatory Culture, Transmedia Storytelling, and Intertextuality in the Squared Circle, and Fractured Fandoms, Contentious Communication in Fan Communities. Dr. CarrieLynn D. Reinhard, welcome to the Contesting Wrestling podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hey, this is fantastic. I love coming on podcasts to talk about professional wrestling because I think whenever I do so, I'm one of the people who hasn't been paying as close attention to it for as long, and yet I'm the president of this association that I helped co-found, so fun juxtaposition that's going on there.
I'm personally very grateful to you for what you've done for the academic study of pro wrestling, which I had hoped would exist as a thing for many years, and now it does, and that's really cool.
Well, when I got into this, I was legit surprised it didn't really exist. And I guess I grew up in the deep academia, which now, of course, has to be a term. But I grew up as an undergrad grad, and I would come across every now and then some research that was looking at professional wrestling. But during the early 2000s kind of time period, it was mostly, wrestling is racist and misogynist and jingoist and so on and so forth. Which, I can understand those reviews and still applies in some ways. But looking around, and when my partner got me interested in it, I was thinking more about how there's so much stuff to talk about. And it's a really fascinating field for how it touches upon so many different aspects of our life, how it relates to so many different aspects of our life. It brings in fan studies, philosophy, religion, folklore, business practices, political, economic analyses. There's so much that goes into it. And now, for good or for bad, once Donald Trump became president, it kind of helped to get people thinking, hey, maybe we should be taking professional wrestling seriously. And now a lot of people are looking at it in terms of, well, Trump's rally speeches. That's just him basically, doing a promo and all of that. So it's a really fascinating time to be looking at all of this.
It's a shame that it had to come to that for people to start looking at professional wrestling. But like Trump had been involved in the way he's actually involved with anything with wrestling for a long time. So yeah, no doubt about it. And when you look just beneath the surface, you see that the connection isn't just theoretical. I mean, he's still in the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah. As far as I know, him and Hulk Hogan.
Right.
And it's not like politics became like wrestling when he came into power, but he showed everybody that it's really always been wrestling.
Yes. And I think that's a really important thing, because there's that idea of, how you can create the alternate reality, but that only really works if people buy into it and support it. And that's basically politics.
And I would say I have definitely noticed, over the last few years, as like people's reactions to the current political situation, I feel like there's a real relationship between how much like unreality somebody can deal with, like how much sort of just existential horror a human being is like had already had a capacity to deal with, and how much they can make sense of the current situation. Because I know a lot of people who, when you ask them, like, how do you feel about politics right now? How do you feel about Trump? Like, you get, like, regardless of if they're a supporter or not, you just get, like, a lot of nonsense. And I think that comes from people, like, really not being able to handle the way in which he is fracturing, or at least demonstrating the way that reality has always been fractured, but he's a lot more obvious about it. And, so I think wrestling fans were really a lot more prepared emotionally, psychologically, philosophically.
And like, for instance, the feud between CNN and Trump is a wrestling feud, right? It's an artificial rivalry that benefits both sides.
I mean, look at who it benefits. You're right. Everybody involved and nobody else.
Now, before we dive into the matches we watched today, CarrieLynn, I just want to ask you some basic things about wrestling, specifically, and you've touched on this already. Given all things that there are in the world, all the ways one could choose to distract oneself while moving consciously through the universe, why wrestling of all of those things?
You mean from like a fan perspective or an academic perspective? Those are two different answers.
I would like both answers, please.
Okay. Well, from a fan perspective, I don't see it as any different from any other form of entertainment where you have to buy in to the fiction that you are seeing or participating in. So, I mean, I grew up loving martial arts movies and Jackie Chan movies in particular. And you're not going to be entertained by that stuff unless you buy into the fact that, certain things are happening. Or my love of science fiction. Can't buy into Star Wars unless you agree on some assumptions and you just go with the logic of the story world. Same thing with professional wrestling. I don't really see a difference there at all. I don't care that it's, predetermined and all of this stuff. So are movies and books and everything else. So I don't worry about any of that.
So then it's the just characters and stories and things like that attract you to it, like anything else.
Like anything else. And for me, I've always loved characters and stories because of that emotional aspect and because of the imaginative aspect. So as long as I can emotionally engage with the characters, I'm going to fall in love. So for wrestling, one of the first that I really fell in love with was Sami Zayn. And when he was in NXT and the story with him and Adrian Neville and him trying to get the title, but he's this good guy, he can't cheat to get it and all of that. That was fantastic. And I still love Sami Zayn to this day, especially given his political activism too. And then it was Ciampa and Gargano and what they were able to do in NXT, which I might have to write a book on that one because it's so much to unpack at this point. But that was phenomenal.
You read a paper on that at the WrestlePosium.
Yes.
And that was really interesting.
Yeah.
talking about some of the fan activities surrounding that feud as well.
Exactly. And it was a very emotional storyline with very homoerotic undertones, and it was fantastic.
If I can make an observation, just to point out to people who are listening, this is now, a wrestling fan on our show who has gotten into wrestling, and we asked, like, well, what do you like? And everything she's mentioned so far has been from NXT. That's I'm not putting words in your mouth and saying you like stuff that's not NXT, but I think there's this perception that NXT is for wrestling fans that are such big fans that they need something else. It's like, no, the first good stuff that came to your mind was, well, I loved Sami Zayn in NXT, and I think that's important. New fans are coming in through NXT.
Well, but at the same time, though, I was coming in through Lucha Underground, because that was phenomenal stuff.
Oh, super.
Yes.
We're in our premium episodes, we've been watching all of Lucha Underground from the beginning with Evan, because it's the first like wrestling serial that we've been able to get him interested in that way.
That's one of the reasons why we also put it in our greatest cult TV shows book, is because I think of how much of an impact Lucha Underground had on televised wrestling, even in the short time span since it occurred.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, I mean, and I think we're really seeing it in AEW, but I think we also see it in NXT. And yeah, Lucha Underground, of course, was filmed. It wasn't live, so they were able to do more of the editing and more of a cinematic approach. But that approach now has really informed how the matches are occurring when they are live in NXT or AEW. And then also the more cinematic approach that we're seeing now because of the pandemic. So there's been a lot of impact,
right.
and of course the people who have come out of it too, and how much of an impact they've held in their characters more through Lucha Underground.
Yeah, 100%. That makes perfect sense too. A show could only be a cult show really if it cuts off too soon, right? Lucha Underground certainly left people wanting more.
It's noteworthy that you're talking about building a relationship with the characters, and like you're not really going to be able to get into it like any other kind of media. You're not really going to be able to get into it unless you can find some sort of attachment to the characters. Ben and Doc have been telling me for a while now that while I seem to be developing a basic understanding of wrestling, I still have a problem that probably comes in part from like never being a sports fan, that I still don't really care who wins a lot of the time. I'm watching the matches and I'm enjoying them and stuff. So the stuff that we watched today at your behest included the first match that I have ever watched, and the seeds for this were planted a while ago, but it was the first match I have ever watched where I was genuinely invested in one of the characters. And I sent a message to the guys afterwards. I was like, hey, I understand sports really for the first time in my life. As not just a I would be able to watch sports sometimes and be able to think, oh, this is very interesting what they're doing, and oh, they're good athletes, but not really. I never understood that visceral when people just no, why are you doing that? And I got it. Cassidy Jericho made me understand that for the first time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about night 2 of Fyter Fest 2020 from AEW, which took place a couple nights before we were recording this. I don't know what day it is. It was July 8th. Okay.
Time.
And the main event of that show, as Evan already alluded to, was Orange Cassidy against Chris Jericho. That's probably going to be the main thing that we're going to want to talk about here. But I thought the 8-man tag, the Lucha Brothers teaming with the Butcher and the Blade against.
Oh yeah. Sorry, go ahead. You were right. Yes, Butcher and Blade and the Lucha Brothers.
The match was so chaotic
against the Young Bucks and FTR, formerly the Revival, or fuck the Revival, however you want to unpack that. I thought that match was really interesting. It had a lot of what I both like and don't like in AEW in it. So, so I thought those were the two main matches that were most interesting. Then there were a lot of other storyline things that were cool. Nyla Rose planting the seeds of something
Yeah.
that's going to develop. So she's going to have a manager or something like that. Taz bringing out the FTW title for Cage. And then also the drama of Colt Cabana and whether he's going to join the Dark Order. Oh, that's stuff.
Wait, okay, I got a quick question. Do you think that bruise on Colt Cabana was real? Because my partner and I were debating that.
That's a really good question.
For what it's worth, like the sheets are reporting that it was real, and it just was a really bad looking bruise.
Jesus. Okay.
Sometimes you can get a really bad looking bruise, and it's not actually that debilitating, so you still do your athletic stuff if that's what you're there to do. But yeah, that looked real nasty. But in wrestling, it's like if you have a bruise that looks that bad, especially if you can still wrestle, you'd better get it on camera.
Exactly.
You got to take advantage of that. And I thought they played it to great effect. It really helped Brody Lee's character. Like, yeah.
That's why I thought it was real, was because of the way that they shot it. Like, it looked like it was sort of an awkward angle, but it was the angle that would best show it. Whereas if they used makeup or something, they would have done it in a way where they could shoot it sort of straight on.
True. Okay. I love Colt, so that was insane.
He's
Oh,
fantastic.
I'm so glad he's actually kind of getting his due now. He's been good for so many years. And I was worried because he was like losing a lot. It seemed like they were just using him as an enhancement talent, but that's all played into the storyline, which is pretty great.
Maybe maybe my lack of context informs this, but it seemed to me like that was a match with 6 people with one clear protagonist who had a separate storyline from the match, which I just thought that was interesting. I feel like I haven't seen that level of like a complex story mechanic within one match yet, or at least if I had, I wasn't cognizant of it.
You see that a lot more when you're watching the weekly television shows, because like this isn't the kind of thing where it's a notable match we would show you on its own the way a lot of the matches that we show it to you. This match is not an ends unto itself. It's the middle piece of the story.
But I also think it's interesting how AEW ties into the Being the Elite YouTube series as well, because in some ways it's contradicting what you see in AEW, because Colt Cabana there has been doing a long-running bit with Kenny Omega, and you don't really see anything with the Dark Order in Colt Cabana there. But given that he's never been able to get what he wanted with Kenny Omega, it does still tie into the Dynamite storyline in an interesting way. So it kind of becomes this like huger universe. I can't talk today, but a huger universe that the fans can really just spend time in. And it's really interesting how they're building all of that out.
I think that's something that I've kind of missed out on a bit with AEW because I wasn't a viewer of being the Elite, and I don't kind of habitually watch it. So yeah, that extra layer of storytelling is crucial.
I find a very specific disconnect there when I see, I don't want to completely generalize older fans versus younger fans, but definitely older school fans versus newer school fans. The older school fans will be like, well, where's the story here? I haven't seen it. And it's like, well, it's on the YouTube show. And they're like, why don't they just put it on the show? Whereas, younger fans and newer school fans are completely used to having to go multi-platform to find their stuff. And it's like, well, if you want to be a bigger fan of this, you'll subscribe to the YouTube channel. If not, you'll just watch the show and you won't really miss anything per se, except all the extra stuff. And it's an interesting way to do it, and they really embrace the future with it.
Yeah, and I don't think that you have to watch Being the Elite to be able to understand what's happening in AEW. I think they're tangentially related, but if you are someone who wants to have that more deeper emotional connection with any of the wrestlers, I think it really does help to go to Being the Elite. Like, I don't think I'd be as much of a Brandon Cutler fan if it wasn't for Being the Elite. Or meeting him, I guess.
Okay.
That always helps.
It's interesting. So with Being the Elite, it's
just a quick technical question about the Colt Cabana match. So can you just call a timeout? Can you just do that? Because he was like break, and then they took a timeout for a second, and I was like, wait, hold on, I feel like I've missed something.
This is a common heel thing. They call for timeout, even though there are no timeouts.
I was gonna say.
And usually the face announcer will be like, there aren't any timeouts in wrestling. What's he doing?
Because it just
At best, it causes confusion.
it felt like it was 1 degree removed from like, oh guys, I'm hurt for real. Stop for real, guys. Which is,
Now,
I
there's
would
other
love
ways
that,
to
but
communicate that.
Well, and it also kind of plays into Colt Cabana's long-running history of being more of a comical wrestler, too. So it kind of trades in that area as well.
Yeah, I was going to say about being the Elite, it's a little bit more shootish, but only a little bit, right? It's not like a complete shoot, but there's a slightly different level of reality that's happening.
Yes, and it is interesting because it's supposed to be more like the behind the scenes, and it started off with just the Young Bucks essentially doing a on the road documentary, but then over time it's hard to know exactly when it's shoot and when it's kayfabe, because they've had Cody Rhodes become possessed by the spirit of WWE, and he had to be exorcised. And right now,
That happened.
Yeah, that's definitely real.
Yeah, but there's also Frankie Kazarian, I think right now, is talking with a Southern wrestler accent, and no one knows why and what's going on. And Matt Hardy as Broken Hardy will just sometimes come in when someone mentions a Carney term, stop everything and explain the Carney term too. So it is a lot of different layers going on.
The one thing that I remember is when Christopher Daniels botched that moonsault, springboard moonsault thing. And then they made the story about how he feels like he's lost it and all that. And they did all that on Being the Elite, right?
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that was brilliant because they were able to respond to the fans, but not like in a really cruel, direct way or anything. And then they worked it back into the story. It's what is that old farmer saying about how you got to make hay out of whatever, or, there's a farmer saying I can't think of right now.
Haymanade.
I grew up in Manhattan. I have no idea.
look, you gotta wake up early.
Yeah.
To milk the cows to make the hay out of the milk. That's what they say.
That's how it works. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that how they make hay?
Yeah, it's look, we don't need to just go over farm facts that everybody knows, that all of our listeners are like, Dedoy.
All right. Because now that I think about it, I don't know how they make hay.
I have no idea. I'm under the impression it's like grass that you thicken.
Like, I'm sure it's not
dry it first.
Yeah.
It is not my skill set.
I would like. I am wondering if you guys can help me make sense of a reaction I had to one of these matches.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the very first match.
So this is
The
Private
tag
Party
title match? Yeah.
Yeah, Private Party challenging Kenny Omega and Hangman Page
Yes.
for the AEW tag team titles.
I love Kenny Omega. He's absolutely one of my favorite wrestlers that the guys have shown me so far. We had a guest on who described him as the Nicolas Cage of wrestling, and that is now how I think of him. I loved him before that, but now there's something about it that really clicks for me. It's in a way that is hard to articulate. It's a shame that this is an audio medium where I just say words to describe things, and yet I'm like, kind of copping out on that. But still, doesn't matter. So this is a great match.
That guest was Jordan Olds, I think,
Yes.
in episode 33, if people want to look into the context.
So now everybody in this is clearly very good, right? I hadn't seen anybody else, but clearly everybody is excellent. I love Kenny Omega. I did not feel much about this match. I don't know. It did not take me in. I couldn't sink my teeth into the thread of these mixed metaphors I'm using to describe this match.
That's fair. First of all, you have pretty much all baby faces, right? So you don't have a heel face dichotomy to create that particular kind of tension. Mark Quinn and Isaiah Cassidy are extremely talented, just great athletes. They came out of House of Glory, trained by the Amazing Red. They still, I think, there's a different level once you get to TV when you have to figure out the psychology of wrestling TV matches and looking into the cameras and emoting in that way. And I think they have a little ways to go with that. And once they get that, then their matches are going to be a lot more emotionally engaging.
What I liked about this match wasn't necessarily like the match itself. I thought the match itself, like, mechanically was fine. I liked the fact that it wasn't like a long-standing blood feud to get a tag team title shot. I liked that it was just Private Party managed to get a title shot, and they're getting a title shot. The odds were clearly against them, but not in some malicious way. It was just the young team's getting a shot. Let's see if they can take it. And they had a pretty good showing, but, the champs won, as everybody probably thought they would, and Private Party didn't look like, well, they should go retire. They just need to keep doing what they're doing. And like you said, Ben, they do have to refine their game a little bit, despite how clearly naturally talented and hardworking the both of them are.
Yeah, AEW has booked them very carefully. They had them beat the Young Bucks in the tag team title tournament once.
The commentators were talking about that.
Right, and they bring it up as often as they can, that they can, on any night, be the best tag team in AEW. They just need to become more consistent. And that's a great arc for a character in wrestling.
I wasn't really as into that match, just like the week before with Fyter Fest Night 1, when Omega and Paige took on the Best Friends, who I adore. I knew they weren't going to win. I knew Private Party wasn't going to win. There's no way they're taking the belts off of Omega and Paige until FTR, until they face FTR. So it kind of has that to me, a WWE mentality where I'm like, oh, I know what WWE is doing here, so I don't care. And it's fun to watch. There are great spots. I mean, it legit looks like Private Party wants to kill themselves quite often, so it's fascinating. But yeah, it's nothing that I would get emotionally invested in.
And I think that's a problem. AEW, their whole hook is being different from WWE. And unfortunately, they aren't different enough, often enough.
Yes.
I find.
And a part of me wonders how much of that is due to, the pandemic and the limitations as to who can come in. So like Cody can face for the TNT championship and all these things. But yeah, it's a shame right now.
Yeah, that was something they gave Mark Quinn one of those TNT title shots, but it was like the week after he injured his ankle and had a whole storyline with that they totally ignored.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating as well.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a fear with the top brass of AEW where they want to be different from the WWE so as to, distinguish themselves and try to pull in different fans, but they're perhaps afraid of being too different? They're afraid of changing too much lest they lose what they perceive as the core wrestling fans?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of looking at it. I mean, I don't know how much that comes from like the Young Bucks or Rhodes or Omega in terms of top brass, but I think Tony Khan, given that he's really focused on ratings, it seems, he is worried about losing probably that core audience. So I think what happens with AEW then is you get kind of this mishmash of, well, we got to do some things like how WWE does it, but then we also want to try to do different things as well. And so it can kind of create uneven Dynamite shows and pay-per-views at times. And I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate it, because it seems that they're being pulled on by the one way from doing what WWE does, because fans like that, compared to doing what like Lucha Underground did and being more innovative and taking more risks in terms of story, like having Matt Hardy apparently teleport during a show kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see if they resolve that tension or if they just leave it in there as their way of trying to get the most people possible.
So on that note, besides teleportation, what do you think is the strength of AEW? What do you think they bring to the table that's different and perhaps better than wrestling before?
Well, I think they definitely treat the women wrestlers better, even though I would like to see them more. The fact that we don't have jobbers in the same way so far has been great, especially because of the pandemic. I think one of the best things they've done in response to the pandemic is how they've brought in more local talent or more indie talent and really given them a chance. I think that's a great way to keep, the blood fresh, whether it's on Dynamite or on Dark. And having Dark as another show, I think, is really helpful in that regard. I really like the fact that they actually have matches. You rarely have, just talking heads in the ring, which is stupid and don't want to watch.
Though I do find their promos, I like their promos better than when they do promos. I like them better than the WWE ones.
Well, and I think part of that goes to the idea, and if it's real or not. In WWE, there's that idea of it's always Vince McMahon in your ear telling you what to say. Versus AEW, it seems that they actually let the wrestlers who are creative talent be creative talent. And I think that's really important. I mean, you see that in Dynamite, but you see that in BTE as well. And the fact that you have someone like Orange Cassidy able to exist the way he did on the indie scenes, still doing that in these Dynamite shows. I mean, if he had gone to NXT, he'd probably be a completely different character at this point, and it would just be ruined.
So we did have a stand-up interview on this show with Taz, or was that last week? Am I mixing up my weeks? That was last week. I was thinking of Taz giving Cage the belt.
No, that was on this. That was this week.
That was on this?
Cage Cage had a job. Oh no, he didn't have a job match. He just
no.
He came out and
well, the main event on this show was going to be Brian Cage getting a shot at Jon Moxley for the AEW championship. That couldn't happen. Moxley is currently quarantined. His wife Renee Young got the COVID, and AEW is handling it a lot better than WWE was, which is a whole other story.
A really interesting thing about that, they announced on this show that next week they're going to have another special, Fight for the Fallen, which is going to have the title match. And I thought that was a really cool step ahead of WWE, because they've been going back and forth like, oh, we're going to do Fyter Fest. Well, we're going to do Great American Bash. Well, we're going to make it 2 nights. Well, we're going to make it 2 nights. And then on that second show, they're like, well, guess what? We're going to have a third special. So WWE can't help but look like they're copying AEW if they try to do it as well. I thought that was a great tactic.
Taz definitely had some words for the WWE over the last couple of weeks about how they're doing it, and that's all well and good. But I don't know. I wasn't I thought it was cool for a second when Taz pulled out his old ECW FTW title and handed it to Brian Cage. But the more I think about it, I'm not really a fan of the decision or how it goes. I know a few people online, on my Facebook, that got really excited, mostly guys about my age who were watching ECW 22 years ago, the only time this ever meant anything, which is not a large group of people. And then if you're a new fan and you look into it, it was cool when Taz originally brought the belt out that he self-appointed himself this champion, because the whole gimmick was Shane Douglas was the ECW champion, but he was injured, but they weren't stripping of the title, so he just wasn't defending the title for months and months on end. So Taz is like, you're ducking me, Shane Douglas, so I'm just crowning myself champion, which has nothing to do with what's happening here. Brian Cage showed up a few weeks ago, is already getting a world title match. Moxley isn't ducking him, he's getting the match next week, and putting this other belt on him the week before he gets a title match might as well be a big neon sign saying, I'm not winning the title. And that's the way I see it the more I think about it. And I'm usually not this critical of it, but I really think it's just look, isn't this cool? And that's the worst of AEW, because I think they do a lot of things right, and this is not one of them.
And looking forward, what happens? He loses to Moxley. He's still carrying around the FTW title. So they make him this totally undeserving just poser, right?
I guess.
But he's Cage. He shouldn't be that
ridiculous
character.
destroyer. When I saw him come out, I thought that's a good get for AEW. He looks like an impossibly drawn comic book character, and he can move, and he's good, and they can make him a big star.
Well, okay, so I've seen Cage live. He came a couple times to Chicago at AAW, and he's shorter than I am, which destroys the entire
And he's not a very tall guy. I think that makes it easier for him to get so wide, though. Yeah. It's a brilliant move putting him with Taz, because Taz is so short.
True. But the one thing that I worry about with Cage, and I love him to death, is he has a tendency to botch. And I'm worried about that. I'm thinking, unless he does a lot of squash matches, that's going to become a problem for him. He can't go long. There's this one time in particular, he was taking on, what was his name? Johnny Mundo at the time, John Morrison, whatever his name is now. And it really started to go messy. And these are the two guys that were wrestling together in Lucha Underground. So they knew each other. So I'm worried about Cage in that regard. I mean, I'm really happy he's there because I think he's really fascinating. But I think the other reason he's with Taz is because he's also not great on the mic or anything like that too. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not really sure what they're doing with him in terms of what you said.
Like how much confidence they have in him.
I think he has the potential to be a monster, but yeah, this idea, like you just said, about giving him a title, unless they're going to in some way build that title now, which who knows? It seems like it was just like a last minute decision. It's unclear as to what they're actually doing with Cage at this point. He should have come in more like Killer Kross did in NXT, more like monster mode.
So as a segment that had nothing to do with anything else on the show, with no context, Evan, did you have any thoughts on this?
No. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't think you did, but I figured I'd check just in case.
I was watching desperately trying to come up with a take, and I was like, I have no information. I don't have strong opinions about these guys' delivery or anything.
Taz is extremely from Red
cool.
Hook.
That's I support him.
That's about it. And right.
To move it along a little bit, I would love to see Cage wrestle Lance Archer at some point.
Yeah,
yes.
A Haas fight would be good.
Yeah.
They're building the two of them kind of similarly, so that makes you think that there can't be both of them.
And damn, did Archer kill Joey Janela?
yes, he did. Janela's determined to get killed by somebody every week. It might as well be a guy like Lance Archer, who's been refining that skill for a long time.
Yeah, the blackout is his finisher that he did through the table. That was pretty gnarly.
Yeah, now what is, so I'm watching this, but this is the second Joey Janela match we've watched. Remind me, what is his overarching deal again?
He smokes cigarettes.
It's hard to, it's kind of hard just to peg Joey Janela. He is the very model of the successful backyard wrestler. And
CarrieLynn, that was a reference to on Beyond Wrestling once. Richard Holliday was on commentary, and the other commentator was like, yeah, Chris Dickinson, he has the best second wind in wrestling. And he asked Richard Holliday, what do you think Joey Janela does the best of anyone in wrestling? And he's like, I don't know, smoke cigarettes.
He did pull out the cigarettes 45 minutes into a match once and start smoking them, and I thought, that's impressive. I don't think I could do that. But yeah, so it's really hard just to peg Janela. He represents a certain section of the wrestling fandom, and a growing portion of the inside wrestling community that people will identify with. It's not a character really that'll be number one, but he has his fans who think he's number one.
Yeah,
I go back and forth on him all the time.
Me too. Yeah, I'm highly ambivalent. And he represents two different things. He represents the super DIY backyard, self-trained, built his own name in the business. And I guess related to that, he represents the sort of curatorial movement in wrestling, where individual wrestlers set up their own shows and are able to be creative as individuals in a way that they weren't before in the wrestling business. And that part I absolutely love about Janela.
I love the fact that they're starting to team him with Sonny Kiss as a way to get Sonny Kiss on the air, but also kind of this interesting dynamic between the two of them, because they seem like they should be opposites in some ways, but they both have this playful dynamic that, I don't know, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, they have more in common than people would realize. They both came up in the indies in the same time, doing kind of out there characters that they really owned because it's them.
Yeah.
I've talked to a few people who have been angry, how come they're not using Sonny Kiss? And I kept saying, let's wait for them to have something for Sonny to do. Now they have something for Sonny to do, and it's good, and we haven't seen him pointlessly on television for 6 months beforehand. You'd see him on Dark, usually being featured when he's on, if you watch Dark. But yeah, now he's on Dynamite, and I think it's great. I expect very big things from Sonny Kiss.
And hopefully JR will get his gender right consistently moving forward.
I'm just glad he gets Nyla's right at this point.
Yeah, well, JR is clearly trying. Like, I know people will sometimes ask him directly on Twitter. It's like, how come they're not canceling Jim Ross? And Ross responds directly. He's like, because I've talked directly to these people and I'm trying, and everybody appreciates that. And, get off my back, you troll. Like, thank you, JR. That's how it goes.
JR's out there giving dads hope, that like maybe your dad will be able to start getting pronouns right one day. And then you being the general you. Now Archer, I noticed during this match, Archer, who I was not familiar with, seems to directly.
We watched his match with Cabana.
Okay,
before.
Well.
Yeah,
I don't.
We did, actually. No, that's fine.
Look,
what
I
was your
don't
point about him?
remember what we did last week, so I cut me a break. Archer. Yeah.
We gotta have tests on this show. Then you'll remember.
Archer seems to directly address the camera much more than other wrestlers do. Is that the case?
It's a good thing to notice. I think that comes from him being in New Japan for so long, where the wrestlers not only do that more often, but as somebody who primarily speaks English in Japan, a lot of those guys will often say really awful stuff into the camera because they know nobody can understand them. They had to tell Tama Tonga to stop because he was just cursing too much on what was being filmed for American television, and so he did. But yeah, that's a good thing to notice. I didn't notice that, but now that you mention it, he totally does.
Yeah, Archer kind of, he's this transgressive character. He beats up the people around the ring. Now he can beat up the fans because they're wrestlers. He can talk to the camera. He just breaks boundaries everywhere.
Him bringing Sonny Kiss to the ring and throwing him at Joey Janela wasn't a random thing. Every week when he has, like, ostensibly his squash match, he carries one guy to the ring and throws him in the ring and hits him to warm up for beating up the next guy, which I think is great. Like, I've never seen that before, and it makes sense. And he has, like, dirty old Jake the Snake Roberts standing there outside, like, at least this guy can't move his limbs anymore. He'd be causing more trouble.
And because, CarrieLynn, you've done some work on wrestling in the fourth wall. Am I right? I perused a link. So, I hope...
Yeah, on my website, and it was kind of like working through ideas that went into the Convergent Wrestling chapter I wrote.
And yeah, well, I mean, do you find a lot of I haven't seen a lot of full-on fourth wall breaking, but I guess a lot of the tension in wrestling is that people are always sort of pushing up against the fourth wall.
Well, the interesting thing is the fourth wall has kind of a different application when it comes to professional wrestling, because a lot of times, especially at a live show, you want to engage with the audience. You acknowledge that they're there. You do calls for them so that they respond to you. You react to what it is that they're doing. So it's not the same as like a play that has a fourth wall. There really is more of a porous membrane, if you want to say, between the two. And I don't really think that idea of talking to the camera is all that different from, jaw jacking at someone who's in a live audience. It's just, you're doing it to the televised audience. So I'm not surprised by it. I actually think Lance Archer might be doing it more because he does have Jake Roberts to be the one who's supposed to be on mic as the manager. So he's able to express himself and have that force come out when he's addressing the camera, because he can't do it in promos.
The live audience is so important. To your point, something that sometimes you'll see a subtle difference between like televised and like generally non-televised stuff, either in the indies or I went to a house show back, recently before they stopped letting a lot of people indoors, and they had Randy Orton versus AJ Styles, and the finish was AJ goes up for the phenomenal forearm, Randy grabs him and gives him the RKO and pins him. Everybody cheers, yay. If they were to do this on television,
I wouldn't have been cheering for this.
AJ would have AJ would have bounced off the top, jumped, Randy would have caught him in midair, and they would have done a spectacular, out-of-nowhere fraction of a second grabs him into the RKO spot. But this wasn't done for the shock of television. It was done for the live observance of, most of Madison Square Garden. So AJ jumps up for the phenomenal forearm. Randy grabs AJ's head while AJ is still on the top rope, and he waits for half a second and smiles. And then the crowd goes, oh, he got him! And then he drops him with the RKO. And it was so much more effective. There's no fourth wall there. It's a live performance of sports where there's people watching and they want to see a winner. And it's just a difference that I notice when I see, stuff like that. And that also goes back to Private Party not quite knowing how to do television yet, the way a live audience is different, and they'll get there.
Now, of course, speaking of the fourth wall, we come to, unless there's, is there another match that you guys want to talk about? I thought the Nyla Rose squash was fucking great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nyla Rose destroyed two jobbers and said basically she's going to get a manager. I can only hope it's Vicky Guerrero.
I know, I was thinking the same.
Yes.
That'd be fantastic.
I always love the power bomb one person onto another one.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. I was like, damn, I wish Luna Vachon was still alive. But yeah, Vicky would be
a wrestler
great too.
Picking up another wrestler to strike a third wrestler is truly the essence of wrestling in that moment, I think.
It's fantastic.
I remember when you first saw Doc wrestle, Evan, you posted a picture that you had interpreted as him hitting a guy with another guy.
Let's say that's what was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yet, speaking of the fourth wall, we of course. Oh no! Okay, damn it! This transition.
We have one more match.
I guess I should have fucking asked this question later.
You'll get to it eventually.
No,
we will let you do it.
All right, just go talk about your whatever you're going to talk about.
I guess it's not. Well, there's the 8-man tag.
Right.
Oh yeah.
This crazy 8-man tag they did.
This
between the four tag
helped me
teams.
understand. I think I have a 6-guy cap on how much I can on how many people I can care about in a match at any given time. I don't know. I'll try to expand it as time goes on, but I think 8 guys. I don't know. Might be too many guys. It's a lot of threads to carry.
The first half of the match, I was like, oh, it's just more of this nonsense high spots for no reason, Lucha Brothers style match. But they drew me in by the end of it. And pretty much the relation between the Young Bucks and the FTR, I thought really helped drive it.
I like that they did the opposite of what they usually do, where it would be like, oh, the opposite tag teams can't work together. It's like, no, as it turns out, when you put the Young Bucks, the most tag team specialists in the country, and team them with FTR, the hungriest, most up-and-coming tag team in the country, and have them tag team together, they can tag team better than everyone else. I mean, of course, eventually they did the ridiculous destroyer spot to the outside.
That was
finish,
I mean,
but
you can't not like that.
Some people could not like that. I like how Ricky Morton posted an impassioned defense of that spot on Twitter, basically get with the program or get to the side, I mean, they were criticizing him for doing too many drop kicks in the 80s, and now he does the Canadian Destroyer. Right. And it doesn't look good, but I love it.
Well, that's the thing is the match built up to that spot. And if there hadn't been quite as many high spots preceding it, I think it would have had even more impact and would have made a little bit more sense. But
and it did lead directly to the finish.
Exactly.
Which helps.
Well, and for me, that match was basically NXT love coming together with Lucha Underground love. Because I remember when the Revival first showed up and we were like, oh, they're so awesome. If only they could take on Pentagon, or only Pentagon could go to NXT or something. And I'm very glad he didn't, of course, but it was kind of like that. It's kind of like fan fiction come to life in a certain way, because as a fan fiction writer, you're creating this alternate universe where you can control the story. And this was essentially the end result of something that I would have wrote as fan fiction.
That's awesome. But let me just don't get me wrong. I really like both Pentagon and Phoenix individually. For some reason, when they get together, their matches, they don't sell. Their matches turn into just nonsense, acrobatics. And we covered their match on one of the very first episodes of Lucha Underground. And it's tough. It might as well be two hulking dudes like bear hugging each other. Like
they are the fireworks display. They are kind of the people criticizing the Young Bucks for doing too much and being, no, we're hiring the Lucha Bros. And then we're going to wrestle, and we'll show you too much.
I think part of the problem is Pentagon is such a natural heel and Phoenix is such a natural face that putting them together, it's like, I don't quite understand where they're coming from. But
well, I think, but Phoenix has, I thought, really gotten into the dark side much better. The fact that he will kick your head off from the top rope and things like that. I mean,
yeah.
So I don't know. I like them together, and I just really like that type of acrobatic approach because of how much I love like Jackie Chan and those types of martial arts.
Sure.
Flippity.
Well, clearly it's very popular. A lot of people think that's great. Like, it doesn't quite get me. Like, I mean, it's pretty. I like it enough. I like it more than Ben does. But it's like it might make me sound like an old fart, but I wish they'd do a little more selling because it helps me invest into the match. But I'm not the only person watching wrestling is the thing. And is one of my grander points about this podcast is that so much of wrestling fan, and this isn't just in wrestling fandom, but a lot of wrestling fandom is predicated on the fact that you have decades of experience just watching stuff, which as if you keep it to that standard, you can't attract new fans.
Right.
And a lot of the new fans think this is the best wrestling in the world right now. And they're not wrong. They're just fans.
Yeah, I like high flying too, but like for instance, on the episode that I'm talking about, there was a Pentagon Phoenix match and then a King Cuerno Drago match. And I thought Cuerno and Drago, they had plenty of crazy high flying as well, but they wove it into more of a coherent narrative of a match.
Well, that was when Cuerno was like hunting them down. So yeah, he had more of a storyline built into it versus I think Phoenix. And I really wish Lucha Underground had been able to like finalize that storyline because it was never totally clear if Phoenix was a god or something, and that would have helped to like clarify what was going on with Pentagon.
Yeah, well, this was the very beginning, but we hadn't really been introduced to their characters at all. Was part of the problem, I think.
Yeah,
but I think it actually makes a lot of sense that Cuerno ended up in WWE. He's a better fit for their style.
Evan, you wanna transition us
forward? Speaking of really good selling, I guess coherent match structure. Go.
Modern characters that still make a lot of sense.
I do feel like the commentators did a good job of nailing Orange Cassidy, where they pointed out that he's skilled, just has no ambition.
I can relate to that.
Oh yeah. But yeah, we come
or the inverse,
We come to the match that I watched live. I watched this match twice for this episode. I watched it live, and just out of the sheer excitement of seeing these two come together, and I don't know. This was great. I love it. First, I just want to point out, I feel like when I'm working out, like my ultimate goals are to look like Chris Jericho. I think because I think he's just got the like. That seems reasonable. He's not shredded. He's got the ideal dad bod going on. Like he's like a fit barrel, like I don't know. I like it. This is incredible. I fucking loved this match. I felt thrilled and excited. I felt like Orange Cassidy sells in this beautiful fashion that a lot of where he crumples. He absolutely crumples. Then the same way there is so much subtle stuff to his physicality that is so incredibly unique. I don't know. I could wax poetic all day about it.
He crumples even when he's delivering offense. Like,
oh yeah.
And he did the splash from the top where he normally just falls. And this time he got some lift in the air, but he still just fell somehow.
That really needs its own name because it's not just a splash. It's really like just a thwomp of some kind, or it should be called like the I don't know, like the juice drop. Not that. That's terrible. But
And I got it, because I think the point of it is the send off to people that do like 630-degree rotations. We could just call it the 90, because he goes from upright to horizontal. It is the 90-degree splash. It's the 90. Yeah.
it is an aerial slumping.
Yes.
Like that's what's reminded. He
Yes.
slumps his way into the air, which should not happen. It shouldn't.
Well,
That shouldn't
especially
exist.
the way he did it this time, where he somehow split the difference between doing an actual dive or like lift off into the air and still just flopping.
There was a subtle moment I didn't catch the first time, which is at the very beginning when he goes to put his hands in his pockets. Aubrey is there. Aubrey Edwards is there, and she just kind of like, just in full like professional ref form, like sees that he puts his hand in his pockets and just kind of gives this, yeah, okay, yeah, that's acceptable.
happens.
That's yeah.
That's a legal maneuver, putting your hands in your pockets. I'll allow it.
And then he freaking headbutts him out of it. That was surprising in a very awesome way.
But yeah, I don't know. How did everybody else feel about this?
I really like how AEW has handled Orange Cassidy. If you knew who he was ahead of time, you knew what to expect. But if you are one of those people who have never come across him, he divides a lot of fans because he has a particular way of doing things that people just do not want to buy into. So I like how they brought him in with the best friends and how he would be the center of the hug. I thought that was brilliant. Having him just along the ring apron and whatnot as kind of like a valet, essentially. But then slowly building him up over time. Like his match against Hawk was really, really good. And kind of showing him where he's not very emotional, of course, because being emotional takes too much energy as well. But when you kick him in the face or you bloody him, and the fact that he's still wearing that bloody t-shirt, which is really, really good. So when you push him enough, he's going to push back. It's kind of like, I'm on a Jackie, apparently have to watch some Jackie Chan because I keep thinking of it. But it's kind of like watching
endeavor,
Drunken
sure.
Master.
Oh, yep.
So when you push Drunken Master enough, he will act, but it's kind of this interesting way of reacting to the environment and kind of having a very fluid, go with the flow approach that's masterful, absolutely masterful.
Yeah, they're really careful about, taking what seems, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, what seems like a kind of one-dimensional character, and very carefully expanding him in various directions.
Yeah.
It is such a delicate balancing act to maintain that character that, once again, is a character that should not work. A character that doesn't care about the thing should get old very quickly as a joke. And he maintains this, fleshing out that sort of I guess he's sort of a slacker. He's sort of a, you can say he's sort of a lot of different things. It's hard to encapsulate in a short phrase, but I don't know. Sorry, you go.
And well, in a match like this, where we're building on the sort of baseline Orange Cassidy, he can do, like I already mentioned, the putting his hands in his pockets and then headbutting him, or bringing in the fake little kicks halfway through the match, and then he hits him with a real super kick.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, that's why he does that, right?
I feel like he's been building to that spot his entire career.
Absolutely.
It really felt like the culmination of a joke he's been telling audiences for years now.
It's like, that was a shaggy dog, finally.
And
I
the
mean, if
subtle...
there was a time to pay something like that off, this was it. This was such a phenomenal opportunity for Orange Cassidy. A few months ago, he was completely unknown, and he's gotten, not completely unknown, but on a national level, and he got over so much, they're like, well, let's just give him a singles match with the biggest star we have. And it's a great idea, and let's promote it properly and not act like he doesn't have a chance. And I thought that they handled it perfectly.
And the way that, you see, I've learned now. I've learned enough from you guys. I was able to pick up on this, and tell me if I'm right. It felt like the way Jericho put him over was very subtle because Jericho, he's like incredibly disrespectful. People love to disrespect Orange Cassidy. People love to just be like, fuck you and your stupid gimmick, and just kick him in the face while he's down, all this. But also, it was very clear that on a deep level, Jericho's kind of scared.
Right.
Like, Jericho is kind of worried that this guy is no joke, and Jericho's kind of scared of being embarrassed. And so he does these little things. He has his boys punch him in the back. Yeah. He cheats a little bit when Aubrey's not looking, like grabbing on the ropes and stuff. And it's all this little stuff that's like, yeah, Jericho doesn't think he can get away with this cleanly. And that still, even though he demolishes Orange Cassidy, that still puts him over.
It's a big thing. It's a big thing that Orange sends the best friends away, but Jericho doesn't send LAX away, or Proud and Powerful, and they're there with their big things of juice, and they throw the juice in Orange's face.
Like, Jericho doesn't want you to think he takes Orange Cassidy seriously, but all of his actions show that he does because he has to.
I was kind of hoping the juice would give him powers. Like strengthen him, but I guess he doesn't want to go too far with that bit, which I respect. Once again, it's part of the balancing act. Like,
and talking about Jericho putting him over, like there's the spot where he hits him with the bat and hits him with the code breaker, and the fact that Orange Cassidy kicked out of that was huge. That should have put anyone down. It was a genuine near fall, and then of course Jericho eventually gets him with the Judas effect, and he beats him, so Jericho wins the match, but Orange Cassidy was stronger than you expected him to be, and of course there will be more matches. And given that this was on TV, it wasn't a pay-per-view or anything, they shouldn't have done everything. They should have left you wanting a little bit more so they could have a bigger match down the line.
To the point of it being on TV, live, like the numbers are in. The average viewership for Dynamite this week was about 710,000 people. I didn't look at like the quarter hours. I'm not that into it. But that's hundreds of thousands of people, like 750,000 almost, watching Orange Cassidy do his thing and watching that progression of his character. And that's very significant, I think. That's a lot of people for, considering everything you would need to consider.
How many people watch Raw these days?
Raw last week did about 1.7 million people.
All right.
Well, Raw's, the fact that they're doing under 2 million people is like a catastrophe. Right. SmackDown is currently the biggest show at about 2.2, 2.3 million people.
Right. I remember when TNA was doing 1.1.
Right. You remember when TNA was doing... Well, TNA was doing a 1.1 rating, which was about 1.4 million people. They count it a little differently now. So, yeah, Raw now is a little bigger than TNA was at its peak.
Well, and the other thing that I know Tony Khan was pointing out was looking at the NXT versus AEW head-to-head, was that AEW won the prize demo of 1849.
They won almost every demo, and that is significant when it comes to the actual business of television. Now, the truth is, both of their ratings are almost identical. NXT got 30 more thousand people than AEW this week. They had a huge main event. But about 1.5 million people were watching wrestling at the same time on Wednesday night. And it's the most interesting night for wrestling right now. It's certainly not like people want it to be like the Monday Night Wars. It's not. The technology is completely different. There's a million reasons why it's not. But the two shows are driving each other to be bigger and better, and it's good for everybody that this is happening. And I don't even mind that people are like arguing so hard on the internet about it. You can, if you don't like it, and I don't really like it, you can just not argue with them. And that works, The fact that they're arguing means that people care. For the first time in so long, people care.
Yeah.
CarrieLynn, did you want to talk a little bit about, we already did an episode where we discussed the Stadium Stampede. I know you had some thoughts on that.
Well, and I think this is, again, where you see that tension in AEW between wanting to be WWE and wanting to be Lucha Underground. Because I remember watching the Stadium Stampede and thinking it was live because it starts off, like any other type of live match would be. But then you get to Hardy in the pool with Proud and Powerful, and you get some very obvious not live stuff going on. And that's where I think it probably really divided people. And I thought it was really fascinating because not only were they commenting and creating the obviously pre-taped segment, but Hardy was also reacting to what was going on around him in that like box and everything too. So it became postmodern and self-reflective at the same time. And when they had Matt Jackson, was it Sammy Guevara when
The
he did the
100-yard Northern Lights suplex? Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was
Yeah.
it was Looney Tunes. It was
That's a great way
that
of
was
putting
divisive.
it, Looney Tunes.
That was divisive even on this podcast, I will say, because that
was a little
is
much
too-
for me.
that is to date the first thing that we've seen that I was like, you see this is what I want to see all the time, and Ben was just like, I did not care for that.
well, but then for me, I mean, going to like NXT and thinking about Tommaso and Johnny, and how they've had like some really brutal street fights. Like I was live at the NXT Takeover Chicago where they fought each other. It was insane. But I know that stuff's all set up, and I know that stuff is like cushioned for when they're going to do whatever it is they do to hurt each other. So I don't like saying suspend disbelief, but I have to buy into it. I have to be willing to go along with it. And with Stadium Stampede, I was willing to go along with it because it was fun. And as long as it was fun and it had people I cared about, I was just going to go along, and you guys can do whatever you want to do, as long as you do it well. That's all I care about.
Yeah, AEW is a lot more fun than the WWE these days. And I think that's important. Yeah. That's another thing that will attract new fans, and the WWE has done a terrible job of attracting new fans. Because you watch 3 hours of Raw and you don't want to do it again.
Yes.
It is a real slog, a lot of modern WWE. Like, it's hard and boring. And I'm like, people are fucking paying for this, man. Like, come on. Like, if I watch something this stupid on Netflix, I'm like, yeah, all right, well, then Netflix is going to come out with something else tomorrow. It's fine. It's like, I'm borrowing my parents' account anyway. Who cares about any of this? But it's just like, if I bought like a WWE pay-per-view and just got like 7 hours of just like mindless, boring crap with commentators just like vomiting idiocy into my mind.
It's like reading the annotated Silmarillion. It's like not something you want to do on a Saturday night all night long.
At least there's some nice little phrases in the annotated Silmarillion.
You don't like Michael Cole screaming, "Oh my."
The thing that sucks the most is there are certain elements about current WWE that I like more than anything they've ever done, like Sasha Banks and Bayley and Asuka, mostly the women.
The women's division, yes. Their various women's division. They've spent so many years signing all of the best women's talent from around the world that, like, this is one of the reasons why the AEW wants a better women's division than they have, and it's because the WWE keeps signing the talent.
Yeah.
And I want WWE. That's how they're competing.
And I want to follow that, but I don't want to have to watch 5 hours of WWE TV every week to know what they're all up to. I usually read the report and then I'll go back and watch the segments that I want to,
Yeah, I was basically just watching NXT. Even when they went to the 2-hour lives on Wednesday, I would tape one and watch the other, whatever you had to do. Up until WWE decided to fire a lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic. And then I was like, nope, I'm done with you. I'm not going to financially support you in any way now.
And I think that's a good place to call it. Listeners, don't fucking give your money to WWE.
It's really easy if you want to just get a network subscription with the new free email every month. People do it. People talk about it openly. They want more subscriber numbers, and they don't care if they get the money as much as you'd think. So that's all I can say.
Plenty of ways to pirate it. Also, if you really got to see it, you don't have to pay for it. We have one network subscription for the podcast so that we can watch the classic matches that we want to talk about. But if it weren't for that, I would not be a subscriber anymore.
Be careful. McMahon might get the Trump administration in on you and come crack down on you in some way. Get the FCC involved.
That sounds like it would get us a lot of publicity.
This is true.
If you want to spend money on wrestling, there's IWTV, there's New Japan World, Stardom World, DDT has their own streaming service. Who else?
There's all kinds of stuff. Yeah. All kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Find your local indie and buy a DVD if you have something to play it. And
Yep.
still-
Especially if you're miserable and complaining about the WWE all the time, stop watching. There's lots of other stuff to watch.
Yeah.
Professor Reinhardt, I cannot thank you enough for coming on this show and providing your perspective.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
CarrieLynn.
thank you very much.
You're welcome. Like I said, I like talking about this. I am maybe at this point either 9 or 8 years old as a wrestling fan. So I still learn stuff from these conversations, which is
Oh,
great.
the hole is so deep. So very, very deep. And wider the deeper you get. It's ridiculous.
The widening gyre, as it were.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? Where can people find your work? Where do you want to plug?
Yeah.
Well, you can only find me at home right now because of the pandemic, but I'm not going to give you my address. If you want, you can follow me on Twitter at Media Oracle. You can follow me via the Professional Wrestling Studies Association. We have a website, prowrestlingstudies.org, and a Twitter, the PWSA. And there is the Popular Culture Studies Journal, as Ben mentioned, and we're also on Twitter at the PCSJ. Yeah, I had to remember that one. Otherwise, yeah, my podcast is basically done, so I don't have to plug that.
Oh, good. Now I don't feel bad that I forgot to mention it in your intro.
Top.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. You should follow us on Twitter at ContestingW. Let us know if there's anything we missed, if there's anything you think we should cover. We release a bonus episode every week at patreon.com/contestingwrestling. However, in this time of uprising, there are, more important places for you to send your $5 than Contesting Wrestling. So check the show notes. You will find links to some important organizations you should donate your time and money to. And if you send us a screenshot of your donation receipt, we will send you a link to our premium episodes. If you want to send the money and give us money on Patreon, I will not stop you, but nobody should have to make the choice. There's more important things to do at this point in time. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you. Thank you.